authentic conversations about ourselves and our community, exploring topics that uplift and inspire us. From personal growth to social change. So grab your teacup and get ready to join the conversation.
Didn't get to see Kanye because he was in an overflow room. But in terms of being left alone, Kira, are you surprised? When you look at that video, the Intercontinental video, there's no running from it. And artists and celebrities, they wanted to run away from that because they didn't want to be associated with that type of violence. So it came down to money.
Bernarda, thank you. Aaron, want to take it to you as we reach the top of the hour here. We now wait to see if indeed the judge makes a decision. He says he will make it today if he will allow Sean Combs to be released and walk out those doors behind you.
The judge gave them several hours to make written arguments before he issues a decision on release on bail, but Sean Combs is already celebrating after he was acquitted of the most serious charges that he faced that could have sent him to prison for life. He was convicted of transporting people for the purposes of prostitution, but taking that as a win, even though in theory he still faces up to 20 years in prison, Kira.
And acquitted of the most serious charges. Bernarda, Brian, Aaron, thank you. We're going to return you now to your regular programming. For some of you, that is Good Morning America. But I do want to tell you about an ABC News special, Verdict, the Diddy trial, that will air tonight, 10 Eastern. Our coverage continues on ABC News Live and abcnews.com. The entire team will be here for World News Tonight with David Muir. I'm Kira Phillips. Thanks for staying with us.
Hi, I'm Diane Macedo, and we are following that breaking news. Sean Diddy Combs has been found not guilty of racketeering, conspiracy, or sex trafficking. He was found guilty of transportation for the purposes of prostitution. Court has now been adjourned as the judge decides whether he will release Combs today. I want to bring in ABC's Rena Roy outside court and ABC News entertainment contributor Kelly Carter for more. Rena, talk to me about the reaction here in the courtroom, really, when this verdict came down.
Diane, this was an incredibly emotional moment. Sean Combs was visibly overcome with emotion. His feet were shaking under the table as the verdict was being read, and he then got down on the ground, kneeling in prayer when he found out that he had been acquitted on the most serious charges, racketeering, conspiracy, and sex trafficking. He turned to his family and he said, "I'm coming home, baby." And there were loud cheers and applauses in the courtroom. We know that his family has been here to support him almost every single day of this trial. They actually just walked out of the golden doors of this federal courthouse here in Lower Manhattan just a couple of minutes ago. And there are a lot you can't see now because there's a bus here, but there are a lot of supporters here out here for him. Of course, people who also weren't so happy about this verdict. There's a lot of bloggers that have been covering this trial since day one, as well as all the media. We have been out here for almost 2 months at this point. Court is now adjourned for the day, but things are not over because the judge still has to weigh whether or not Combs will be released as early as today. That's what his defense attorneys are asking for, but prosecutors are arguing against that. So they both have several hours. The judge wants letters back from them making their cases at around 1 o'clock, and then we will potentially hear later today whether or not he will be released, Diane.
And I want to bring in our legal contributor, Bernardo Villalona, as well here on set with me. Bernardo, acquitted of the most serious charges, still found guilty of transportation to engage in prostitution. Each of those carries a maximum. Each of the 2 counts he was found guilty of there carries a max of 10 years. So what does the judge have to consider now, not only in terms of sentencing, but in terms of whether or not Sean Combs should be released today?
Sean Combs should be released today. He was acquitted of the most serious charges, and those also having to deal with violence. I was at his bail applications for the 3 times that he made a bail application. And the huge sticking point by the prosecution, by the government, is the violence itself, and that he was intimidating witnesses and still in contact and breaking the rules while he was in custody. Now, at this moment, those were allegations. Now a jury of his peers has spoken and has found him not guilty. So those are no longer allegations. So he should be freed. In terms of what the judge is going to consider is, 1, that he was acquitted. 2, that the sentence that he is facing, there is not a mandatory minimum. So technically, the judge can even sentence him to probation or to time served. 3, whether there's a risk of flight, of him not returning to face sentencing date. That is highly unlikely, especially since Sean Combs knows what the exposure is, and also that for him to flee, it would give him a bigger exposure and almost guaranteed a jail sentence if he weren't to come back. So the judge should release him today. In terms of sentencing, now that's a long process there. The first thing that's going to take place is that the judge is going to order the Department of Probation to do a probation report and a probation interview of Sean Combs and do a deep dive into his background and ultimately make a recommendation as to what the sentence is going to be. Best believe that that Intercontinental video is going to come back into light when it comes to sentencing, because the judge can take into account criminal acts that he wasn't convicted of when determining a sentence, a just sentence for Sean Combs. But given that he has a lack of criminal record in terms of something serious, it's highly likely that the judge will give him something under relation as to time served, or maybe just a few more months in terms of being incarcerated, since he was found guilty of 2 counts that technically can run consecutive.
Now, the prosecution has already said they're going to be seeking a severe sentence here, or a significant sentence. What do you think that means in terms of what they're going to at least try for?
Oh, I wouldn't be surprised if the prosecution doesn't ask for the max and asks for the sentences to be
just 20 years.
Yes, for 20 years, the max, because it's 10 years max as to each of these counts, and they can actually run consecutive. The prosecution is going to name out that, look, when it came to transportation to engage in prostitution, we're not talking about just 1 instance or 2 instances. During their closing arguments, they put up a photograph of 27 men that were actually trafficked as a result of doing these freak-offs and these hotel nights. So the prosecution is going to try to seek the maximum amount of sentence and also include those acts that he was found not guilty of in terms of that Intercontinental video, and get statements from Jane and Cassie in order to try to move this judge to try to get the maximum sentence, which again is highly unlikely.
Bernardo, the defense argued throughout that all of the sexual encounters in this case were consensual. Does the fact that the jury found him not guilty of sex trafficking mean they agreed with that?
I wouldn't say that. I would say that the prosecution has to prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt. So just because a person is found not guilty doesn't mean that they necessarily said that they found that they weren't any freak-offs or that it wasn't consensual, but that there was some seed of doubt that prevented them from saying that he is guilty. When they say not guilty, it's not saying that they're proclaiming that Sean Combs is innocent. What it is that that person, Sean Combs, is being acquitted. That verdict says that the prosecution did not prove this count beyond a reasonable doubt, but not necessarily that they believe in their heart that Sean Combs didn't commit these acts and that it wasn't consensual.
And I want to bring in our chief investigative correspondent, Aaron Katersky, who's been at the court throughout this whole trial. Aaron, what sticks out to you about the way this verdict came down and the discussions that these attorneys are now having as they write letters to the judge about whether or not Combs should be released?
They have several hours now, Diane, to make the case whether Sean Combs should be released on bail. Combs himself offered $1 million bail, and the judge indicated to him that he did not want to go back to MDC, the federal lockup in Brooklyn where he's been held. And that's when he clasped his hands together as if to say, that's exactly right, Judge. And so the judge said he would decide today whether to release him on bail. Prosecutors asked for a few hours to put their letter in opposing it. He does still, as prosecutors point out, face the possibility of 20 years in prison on the conviction of transportation for the purposes of prostitution. And the way prosecutors see it, he's a flight risk and a potential danger. Even though they did not prove the sex trafficking or the racketeering conspiracy, prosecutors still told the judge he has a predilection to committing crimes, including violent crimes, and represents a potential danger, particularly to women. He also, we should say, Diane, faces at least 6 civil lawsuits that accuse him of acts of violence. We'll see where those shake out in the coming weeks and months, but Combs would no doubt like to try and fend those off as quickly as possible. Outside here, Diane, there is a crowd of supporters that looks like they're going to hang out to see whether he walks through those golden doors sometime this afternoon.
And I want to drill down on those civil suits with our legal contributor, Brian Buckmeyer, also here with me on set. Brian, I think it's in the realm of 60 civil lawsuits against Sean Combs right now. How does this verdict impact those cases?
Yeah, so about 60 or 59 civil lawsuits. I believe 14 of them involve a minor. And so the impact for those cases on this is somewhat positive in some lights, actually, ironically enough, and somewhat negative. The negative, obviously, in that he was found not guilty of the RICO conspiracy and the sex trafficking. So if there's any allegations that mirror that in these civil complaints, Sean Combs is going to feel very confident that he might be able to win those. But different allegations, different alleged victims. And I think, as Bernarda pointed out as well, there's a different standard there. And it comes to a criminal case, it's beyond a reasonable doubt, a much higher standard than the civil standard of preponderance of evidence, more likely than not, or 51%. But the reason why I say it could be potentially positive for those filing civil lawsuits is if Sean Combs was found guilty of that racketeering conspiracy, there would be a forfeiture application in terms of trying to dismantle that racketeering conspiracy, that criminal enterprise, where the federal government would have had their opportunity to take money out of Sean Combs before the civil lawsuits would have had their opportunity. So in a way, Sean Combs may still have enough money in his pocket that those filing civil lawsuits might be able to find a victory through that process. I compare and contrast to, for example, the R. Kelly trial, where he was found guilty of racketeering conspiracy, and there was a forfeiture there, and many of the people filing civil lawsuits against R. Kelly found it difficult to win in those cases.
And I want to bring in Kelly Carter to talk about the cultural impact here, because, Kelly, it's hard to understate or overstate, I should say, the role of Sean Combs in music and culture in general. I mean, not only was he a legend in rap music, he was a legend in music in general, as a producer, as an artist, and then on to becoming a businessman with an empire. What does this mean for all that now?
I mean, I think it means a lot. The truth of the matter is that it almost didn't really matter what the outcome was of this trial. The conversation changes immediately about what his legacy is. You know, this is a person who really touched every corner of pretty much every industry, not just music, not just spirits, not just fashion, politics, pretty much every industry he touched. He really ushered the hip hop generation into the mainstream, into commercialism, and made it the multi-billion-dollar industry that it is right now. And I think, you know, regardless of the outcome, it's going to be difficult for people to unhear some of that testimony and to certainly unsee, you know, that infamous now Intercontinental video that was released with him and Cassie from 2016. And I think that it'll be interesting to see what his life is like as a businessman moving forward, but I don't expect to see something in the immediacy. And I definitely expect us to be dissecting his legacy for a good while now.
And we do have a statement from Cassie Ventura's attorney, Douglas Wigdor. He says, and I'm quoting here, "This entire criminal process started when our client, Cassie Ventura, had the courage to file her civil complaint in November of 2023. Although the jury did not find Combs guilty of sex trafficking Cassie beyond a reasonable doubt, she paved the way for a jury to find him guilty of transportation to engage in prostitution. By coming forward with her experience, Cassie has left an indelible mark on both the entertainment industry and the fight for justice. We must repeat with no reservation that we believe and support our client, who showed exemplary courage throughout this trial." The statement goes on to talk about her strength on the stand and to talk about the misconduct they say has persisted for decades without repercussion. Bernarda, I want to go to you on this point of what this means for future cases, precedent here. Does a verdict like this deter future potential witnesses in similar cases?
I think it definitely does. A verdict like this does deter victims and witnesses from coming forward. I think when you're talking about when the perpetrator is one of who has power, who has money, who had the key to the city, I think victims are looking at it, wait, if the prosecution gave it all they had and they went after him and they still didn't find him guilty, what about little old me? What about just regular perpetrator from down the block? What's going to happen in that type of case? So I think this is a huge deterrence for victims.
And Brian, I'm out of time, but I quickly want to touch on the way this case was brought has been criticized from the beginning. The actual charges they brought, the fact that it was a federal trial and so on. Walk me through that part of it. And do you think there are any legal lessons learned there?
I think there are legal lessons in terms of how to bring this case. I think for federal prosecutors, they've used the RICO statute in very creative ways. If you want to talk about R. Kelly, if you want to talk about Donald Trump, there have been people who have been in the spotlight who have bemoaned and said that this is not how the statute is meant to be. And I think this might be one of the first major setbacks in this use of the statute in this kind of new wave. And I think this is going to be, agreeing with what Bernarda said, but I'll add on to a reevaluation of how do we define RICO going forward? Who fits into a RICO? What is a criminal enterprise? And are we going to open or close off how we now progress or move forward in terms of evaluating should we use this statute for these different types of enterprises?
All right. Rena, Brian, Bernarda, Kelly, thank you all. And big thanks to Aaron Katersky, who again has been at that courthouse from the very beginning. Also, for more on today's verdict, catch the ABC News live show Burden of Proof, the case against Diddy, streaming tonight at 5:30 p.m. Eastern. Meanwhile, the rough weather is complicating Republicans' race to pass President Trump's so-called big, beautiful bill. Speaker Johnson says the House could vote on it as soon as today after the Senate narrowly passed the bill yesterday. And now the president's planning to meet with Republicans at the White House to get it done. Let's bring in ABC News Capitol Hill correspondent Jay O'Brien and ABC News senior White House correspondent Selena Wang for more on that. Hi, Jay. So what's the latest on this potential vote?
Yeah, so we're still tracking a preliminary vote, a key procedural vote, the first hurdle for this bill as it's come back to the House. To be sometime this afternoon now. It was actually supposed to be as we speak, but that's been kicked a little bit into noon. So this is the vote on what's called the quote-unquote rule. The rule is what kicks off your ability to vote on this legislation in the first place. And what you're seeing there on the floor are members debating this rule. And forgive me as I scroll here on my phone, because I just caught up with Speaker Johnson not long ago, and I asked him, does he have the votes to get this over the goal line? Because right now, by our count, he's got at least a dozen in his party who say that they are either firm no's or they're weighing no or they're holdouts. As you said, a number of them have shuttled back and forth from the Capitol here to the White House to be worked on by the White House to try to get from no to yes. Speaker Johnson said, quote, "We're working on everything," but he wasn't necessarily clear that he has the votes in his column right now. Steve Scalise, the number 2 Republican in the House, also earlier today saying that this procedural vote, the one I was just mentioning, the one that's imminent, it's going to probably happen.
Things are a lot better than they were yesterday, Diane. Right now, we are seeing just over 300 cancellations nationwide. That is considerably lower than what we were seeing yesterday when we had those storms coming in through the Northeast. Even out in Denver and Las Vegas, as you mentioned there on your screen, a dust storm stopped.
An alarming scene as a fight
complaint and her courage and her strength.
From now, and they are going to submit letters. Then there will be a hearing in open court as the judge decides whether to release Combs. The defense argued because he was acquitted of the most serious charges, he deserves release on bail. Combs offered $1 million, offered to put up his luxury homes, and certainly the court and everybody else saw these pictures of his opulent homes in Miami and in Los Angeles that were part of the case. Prosecutors opposed it, said Combs still faces the possibility of 20 years in prison, and therefore he should be held up until the time of sentencing, because it's still possible that he's going to be hauled off to jail, and he represents a flight risk and a danger otherwise because of a predilection of to commit other crimes, according to prosecutors. Combs told his family, "I'm coming home, baby," after he was acquitted of the most serious charges. Applause broke out in the courtroom. If he does get released on bail, we're told he is going to walk through those golden doors and make a statement outside here on the sidewalk. It would be an incredible moment if someone who's been incarcerated for the better part of a year is able to win release on bail and able to talk about the outcome of this trial.
Kelly, Combs has had such a huge influence on the music industry and beyond. What did these charges do for that? And does this verdict change anything?
I mean, the charges, it's definitely a mark on his legacy, and I think it's a significant one. You know, I think it's noticeable that we're not talking about the parade of famous people and titans of industry who showed up to support him in court. So I feel like that is indicative of probably what we should expect his status to be in the business that he left, And again, everything changed once that Cassie civil lawsuit dropped in 2023. I mean, we hadn't seen much of him since then. And certainly once he became incarcerated, we didn't see an outcry of support from the biggest names in Hollywood and in the music industry. So I do think that this changes things significantly for someone who, quite frankly, has been a cultural icon for 3 decades.
And Rena, I read a statement a little while ago from Douglas Wigdor, Cassie Ventura's attorney, talking about how critical she was to this case, how it all started with her civil complaint and her courage and her strength throughout this trial. But I know he also spoke outside the courthouse. What is he saying about her reaction to this verdict?
Diane, there is no question that Cassie Ventura was key in this case. Doug Wigdor spoke just a short time ago outside of court here, saying that Cassie Ventura is in a good place. He says that she's happy with this outcome. They would have, of course, preferred a guilty verdict across the board, but they say that they're proud of her courage here. Take a listen.
The reaction is that we're pleased that he's finally been held responsible for 2 federal crimes, something that he's never faced in his life. He still faces substantial jail time. Of course, we would have liked to have seen a conviction on the sex crimes in RICO, but we understand beyond a reasonable doubt is a high standard, and we're just pleased that he still faces substantial jail time.
Now, Wigdor also said that he's proud of Cassie for shedding a light on this, saying that she has paved the way for other alleged victims to come forward. Remember, he is facing nearly 60 civil lawsuits at this point, so his legal troubles are far from over, Diane.
And Aaron, let's drill down on that a little bit. Where do those civil cases stand right now?
Well, they're all pending. There are more than 6 of them alleging all sorts of things. Some seem to be more credible than others. Some named plaintiffs, some not named plaintiffs. But Combs is going to have to reconcile with all of them. Most of them seek monetary damages primarily, and he's in a better position to fight them now, although there are some differences should any of them go to trial. The standard of proof is less in a civil case, preponderance of the evidence as opposed to beyond a reasonable doubt. And if they do go to trial and Combs opts not to testify, unlike in the criminal case, in a civil case, the jury is allowed to make an inference about why a defendant would choose not to testify. So it would work a little bit differently, but the focus now, Diane, is clearly on the possibility.
All right, we know
bail,
what the
to
state of
defense
Diddy is
in the
now
civil
as far as the
cases,
verdict
and
goes.
to serve a
Diddy's
sentence.
ass was convicted of 2 of the transportation of prostitution, not the ex trafficking and all of that, coercion and force stuff. Okay. So we're going to keep the tea pouring on Diddy for the day of the verdict. Maybe a sentence will drop. We'll see. But we are also seeing if he'll get bail, right? Because Diddy proposed to get bail. So let's tap into Salon Crime and see what they're dropping tea on Diddy. This is outside the courthouse. Okay. Everybody's still pretty hot on Diddy, even though he was found guilty and not guilty at the same time of 5 charges.
Here yesterday as this partial verdict came down, which frankly for a lot of us was a shock that they would get this far. And I don't think I'm being over dramatic by saying that
jury instructions in and of themselves were very complicated. So you have to look at all of the breakdowns of these crimes, understand each one specifically, which is why they've had a few questions going back to the court. So I think that they are really hung up on a couple of things. One, understanding the law. Number 2, understanding what RICO means and how it really feels for them. Because I've spoken to a lot of people who could potentially be jurors at any time, right?
Kind of made their decision already in terms of counts 2, 3, 4, and 5. And so I was like, okay, is Sean Combs going to come inside the courtroom? Is he going to have that same kind of tone that he had yesterday? But it kind of was a little bit different, Chris, in that he came in, he was all smiles, especially when he initially saw his mother. He spoke to her initially just kind of walking into the courtroom. He did what he normally did, was kind of do the little hearts, talk to his mom a little bit. He was coming in with smiles, notably. And then after he gave the heart sign, he sits down, he reads kind of this note or this letter for a little bit. And then it seems like he was either writing something down, jotting something down. I'm not sure because his arms were kind of covering his body position. So I couldn't see if he was like writing a letter back or kind of what was going on there. But then for a moment, I saw kind of the defense kind of all huddled over into a circle area, just kind of talking things over. But the prosecution wasn't inside the courtroom. So I was thinking, okay, maybe a note hasn't been received. The jury is still continuing their deliberations after they started around maybe like 9:05 this morning. And then I saw the defendant kind of chatting with Xavier Donaldson for a little bit. Then Combs was kind of sitting alone for a little bit at the defense table. And then again, right.
As you're processing how all of this played out, as someone who covers
pro Diddy are definitely happy about it.
And I know we talked about when we signed off at the end of last hour, when Diddy's kids left, you saw his sons, his twin daughters, they got in that Sprinter van and they headed out after praying with their dad. And then he goes to wait out the jury deliberations. I know his mom and his sister were in the courtroom 10 weeks. It is inspiring. You worked together, rain or shine. You answered the call of public service. That should give
30 to 60 days from now. In the meantime, both sides will marshal their arguments. They will put forth sentencing memorandum. The defense counsel put together a memorandum. The prosecution put together a memorandum. And also the probation department, the pretrial services, they also put together a memo. They will interview Mr. Combs. They will, each of those 3 branches, if you will come up with what they believe an appropriate sentence is. And then ultimately it's up to the judge to formulate whatever sentence he sees fit in this particular case.
And we'll get some reaction. I'm still waiting to get the description of what the courtroom was like in this moment with Sean Combs being found guilty on the most serious charge of racketeering conspiracy. But Candace, as you look at the not guilty verdict, what could the prosecution look back on and think maybe we should have done that to build a stronger case to maybe get a conviction on this?
Listen, the prosecution put on a very good case. Let's remember that there were no witnesses that the defense even chose to put on. They just said, you know what, you didn't make your case. The prosecution, I would think, if they were going to look back, I don't know, would they do something with Christina Coram? Maybe take that chance. Would they do something with this plethora of security guards that we know were within Sean's orbit that knew everything? Because we know Sean wasn't driving himself to places, Sean wasn't getting candles, and Sean wasn't picking up Astroglide. Are these the people that we should have heard from? Because certainly being in the gallery, these are the people that I wanted to hear from. Would they have provided some glue to any of this? I think that that's something to take into consideration. Who were the people that we have heard all throughout this trial, but we didn't bring? Could they have made a difference?
I want to bring our Sierra Gillespie in right now, who's outside the courthouse. Sierra, what is the vibe there?
I mean, I'm telling you, Chris, this came out of nowhere. No one was expecting that after 1 hour worth of deliberations, we would have a verdict. So much so, the P. Diddy's family left the courthouse. They thought they were probably going to go get some brunch or something, and all of a sudden they're turned around. So I'm telling you, the instant that people were able to show up, I'm shocked by it. There's a major crowd outside of the courthouse. I mean, I have no idea where all of these people came from just to surround and hear all of this. And I mean, I think the vibe is that this is a pretty big win for P. Diddy. I mean, not guilty on count 1 of racketeering. Huge win. I mean, that could potentially throw the life sentence out the window. And you can definitely tell in the crowd here, people who are pro Diddy are definitely happy about it.
And I know we talked about when we signed off at the end of last hour, when Diddy's kids left, you saw his sons, his twin daughters, they got in that Sprinter van and they headed out after praying with their dad. And then he goes to wait out the jury deliberations. I know his mom and his sister were in the courtroom, but did you see them get back? Were they there for this verdict?
I believe so that they were. And I'm telling you, straightforwardly, everything was a mess when we heard the verdict. Elizabeth Milner got up, ran inside. I jumped in, plugged in my microphone and my IFB, ready to go. So it was almost like a frenzy here. You can kind of feel the vibes. And that's what I'm trying to convey to you all, by the way, that here everyone can kind of feel the vibes that something wild is going on. I did see the commotion behind me. I did see the Sprinter van, but honestly, I was plugging in during all of this, so I didn't physically see them with my eyes, but I do believe that they were there in the courtroom.
And if you're just joining us here on Law and Crime on the live stream, it's great to be with you. We have a verdict in the trial of Sean Diddy Combs, and I want to read through this verdict for you once again, just so we're all on the same page. The judge the deputy, in the matter of the U.S. versus Combs, count 1, juror number 5, the foreman says not guilty. Sex trafficking of Cassandra Ventura, not guilty. Transportation for prostitution, guilty. Sex trafficking of the victim that went by the pseudonym Jane, not guilty. And then transportation for prostitution of Jane, guilty. Have another court update coming in. The judge asking the media not to question jurors about their deliberations. Jurors, you can contact our chambers. You gave up a lot these 10 weeks. It is inspiring. You worked together, rain or shine. You answered the call of public service. That should give us hope. The judge then says, I need to address a few matters with the lawyers. Then I will come back to meet with you, jurors. All rise to the jury. Then the jurors then exit the courtroom, and the judge says, I'll hear any application then about sentencing date. Combs' attorney, Mark Agnifilo, says he should be released. Combs Agnifilo says he is no longer charged with sex trafficking or racketeering. His plane has been chartered. It is in Maui. He does not have access to his plane. This is his first conviction, and it is a prostitution offense. He should be released. William Corman, criminal defense
attorney. So it's very likely that Diddy will be released on bail, being that none of the serious charges are pending or he's facing them any longer. He's not facing them any longer. So that's a possibility, y'all. What do you think? Do you think Diddy will make bail? Do you think they will give Diddy bail?
As someone in this line of work, how strong of an argument that is that Sean Combs should be released?
The problem is this. Combs has a significant amount of assets, and if Sean Combs chose not to come back to court to be sentenced, he would be able to do that. So again, correct, he has no criminal record. Correct, he's been found guilty only of the lowest hanging fruit, as we've been calling it.
Also, being that Diddy has no criminal record, how do you think he will be sentenced? Let's ask Siri. If a person has no criminal record and are convicted of 2 charges of transportation to engage in prostitution, what is their likely sentencing? Based on federal law and recent cases, a person with no criminal record convicted of 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution under the Mann Act could potentially face a maximum sentence of up to 10 years in prison for each count. Therefore, with 2 counts, the individual could be facing a maximum potential sentence of 20 years in prison. However, the actual sentence will depend on various factors considering by the judge, such as the specifics of the case, the individual's lack of criminal record, and the judge's discretion. Important considerations. While the maximum penalty is 10 years per count, legal experts suggest a starting point under U.S. sentencing guidelines might be a range of 15 to 21 months for such conviction. So Diddy might just get 2 years for each count. The judge ultimately determines the final sentence, which can be within or outside of the guideline range. Having no prior criminal record could be a factor in sentencing, potentially leading to a shorter sentence. For the charge of transportation to engage in prostitution, there is no mandatory minimum sentence. So, in summary, while a maximum of 20 years is possible, it is likely that the actual sentence for a first-time offender with no criminal record will be significantly less, potentially measured in months rather than years for the diddler. What say the sippers? Do y'all think Diddy will receive up to 10 years, maybe serving 5 in each count? Or do you think he'll get like 2 in each count, maybe serving or getting 4, maybe serving 2, being that Diddy's already served almost 1 year, doing only 1 year in federal prison? That's what I say. I believe that's what my tea is. Y'all drop it down in the chat. We are everything Diddy. Verdict came in, sippers. Get y'all's asses in here and get y'all's teacups filled up with the diddler. 2 accounts of transportation to engage in prostitution. Everything else dropped out on his goddamn ass, okay?
I think it's an argument that can be made. Obviously, the prosecution is going to argue against it vociferously. I'd be surprised if the judge went along with it, but candidly, I think we've all been a little surprised by what's happened in the past few hours. But again, I don't anticipate the judge will allow it.
Mark Agnifilo continuing on here saying his family is here and could sign a bond. He should be released today to go back and live at 2 Star Island, which is in Miami. Judge says, this is just coming up right now. I will hear from the government in a moment. Are you proposing he just walk outside now? And the defense says yes. Candace, there's going to be a lot of conversation about Sean Combs and his legacy. You can't unsee the 2016 video from the Intercontinental Hotel, that is for sure. But how does this verdict impact how people may view Sean Combs going forward?
You know, some people are going to view him as a hero. Some people are going to view him as a victim. They really will. Some people are going to say, what in the world? We were in there for 7 weeks and we heard all of this debauchery and all of these things that when we look at the cumulative effect of the evidence, I think he was guilty. So you're going to have people on both sides. But I think in terms of his legacy, personally, the legacy for him is going to still be his music. That's going to survive and live. But I think there's a legacy that's going to happen in terms of this case in particular. And when RICO is used, there's going to be a lot of conversation and information exchange online and on shows like yours about when do we really need to apply RICO, because out of this, I think that's what the largest conversation has been about. Yes, there was Astroglide and yes, there was baby oil, but what is this RICO and what does it mean? And is it being unfairly used by people who are in the music industry? Is it being unfairly used by people like him who happen to be rich and seemed like someone who we could make a big headline out of if we are the prosecutors? This is what the defense was saying in their closing argument, that this is just over prosecution of someone who, let's leave his legacy alone. There's nobody here who's coming after Sean Combs, but the government. Don't trust them. I think that that's going to be the lasting legacy of this case in particular.
And you think of the 2016 video once again, and it's the video of Sean Combs. He's in a towel. He's chasing after Cassie Ventura, and grabs her and beats her. It was video that Sean Combs then, according to testimony from a security guard, he paid off $100,000 to get rid of what he thought was the only copy. And yet, in the end, they find not guilty of sex trafficking of Cassandra Ventura. William, what about her testimony just didn't get the job done? Or maybe should I say, what is it about the defense's argument that did get the job done and got a not guilty verdict?
I'm going to assume that it was the defense counsel's argument that was saying, look, this is a complicated relationship. This is a relationship that was fraught with domestic violence, but Sean Combs hasn't been charged with domestic violence. Sean Combs has been charged with this grand scheme, this RICO enterprise, if you will. And there's a big difference between being involved in the RICO scheme and being, unfortunately, a serial abuser. And if we were on trial for him being a serial abuser, there's no argument to be made. We've all watched the video. We're going to watch it 100 times during the course of this trial. But you can't make the connection between him being a serial abuser to him running this giant criminal enterprise, including the sex trafficking. Because again, there was a huge amount of digital footprints where she was involved in it and she was willing to go along with it and she was amenable to it and she indicated that she was into it and things along those lines. And those points obviously hit home with the jury.
And also not guilty on sex trafficking of the victim who went by the pseudonym Jane, who also there were text messages that the defense used to argue that these were consensual relationships. There's been a lot of talk, Candace. I want to say hello to the 55,000 people joining us right now for this coverage of the verdicts in the trial of Sean Diddy Combs. There's been a lot of talk about just how good Sean Combs' defense team was, that this was the all-star dream team cast for a defense team. What did they do that is different than the typical defense attorney that you see in a courtroom?
Present witnesses, it was kind of like they did, in that they were able to jab holes into the witnesses on cross-examination. So really they had witnesses speaking on their behalf. If you look on it that way, that you are my witnesses and now I'm going to show inconsistencies. Now I'm going to show bias. Now I'm going to show that you are a money grabber in this particular one. Now I'm going to show that the government is after Sean Combs. So I think that there were a lot of opportunities and they did do a very good job. On the other hand, so did the prosecution. So I think that that's really kind of the takeaway, and that is when we look at these attorneys that were great across the board. That was one of the things that was really spectacular about this. You saw fine attorneys on both sides doing very, very good work. Of course, Sean Combs is in that position to afford an attorney, and not everybody's legal journey is going to look this way. But the defense did do a very good job. During closing, Mark Agnifilo was very interactive, comedic, really kind of brought light to the fact that, you know what, maybe this is, not as big as you think. So we got Astroglide off the streets, right? That's what he said. Big deal. Oh, wow, aren't they great? So he really kind of made light of what this really could translate as when you really break down what he said is just a modern day love story. Some people might laugh at that, but he did connect with the jury in that way. With the same token, so did the prosecution, but the jury made their choice.
Another update from court, the judge asking the defense, are you proposing $1 million bond? Mark Agnifilo says, Diddy's defense attorney, yes, and travel to Florida, New York, and Los Angeles. Then Assistant U.S. Attorney Comey says the U.S. opposes his release. A person found guilty shall be detained until the judicial officer finds he is not likely to flee or be a danger. Comey continues on saying the defendant faces a maximum sentence of 20 years. Even while faced with this case, he assaulted Jane. Here in New York, preparing to surrender, he had drugs in his hotel room, was ready to commit the same offense. The judge then continues on saying, I am not going to resolve this second. I need to review the statutes. Ms. Comey, do you have a case in which bail was denied after a conviction under the Mann Act? You may confer and come back. we'd planned to be here the whole day. So this we do have more business to attend to, even though this verdict has been read. Let's go back to Sierra Gillespie outside the courthouse in Lower Manhattan. Sierra, what more are you seeing outside the courthouse? And just as you're processing how all of this played out, as someone who covers celebrity for our Law and Crime YouTube channel Scandal, how will people, and time will tell, but how does this impact Diddy's legacy compared to if he came back as guilty for racketeering conspiracy?
Wow, Chris, there's a lot to digest. Again, I am still shocked the fact that we have a verdict after 1 hour of deliberation this morning. And like I said, we're here live on our live stream, ready to go and bring you the latest, as Chris has been doing so eloquently, getting you guys all up to speed. So what's happening is I'm standing here facing the camera with the courthouse behind me. And I swear to you, every time I turn back to look and see, okay, what's going on? Am I going on air? Am I not? Every time I turn back around, there is more people. I'm going to guess 200 people, could be more, that are just surrounding the front of the courthouse there as these arguments about bail are going back and forth. You can feel the vibes here, right? And I think going to your next question, Chris, about what does this mean for P. Diddy's legacy, overall, I think this is a win for him, especially the fact that at first this is a hung jury. When we're talking about racketeering conspiracy, either side, we aren't able to decide. Maybe if it ends in a hung jury, there could be a retrial down the line. We don't know. It's still up in the air. But the fact that it's not guilty, major win. The fact that it's not guilty on 2 more of the charges, the fact that he is only found guilty on the transportation to engage in prostitution, I think that's a major win for him. And especially in the way that celebrity lives are different than the ordinary people, quote unquote. And I'll call myself an ordinary person. My life is a little bit different than P. Diddy's. But I mean, as far as all of that goes, honestly, they talked about this during the ongoing trial. They talked about how there was another famous rapper who took part in these freak-offs, with the transportation to engage in prostitution, kind of going to that. Now, I'm not saying this person has been charged at all, but what I'm trying to say is that in the celebrity world, this is more acceptable. This is just something that happens. It's not something that people usually get charged for. So honestly, P. Diddy's reputation is not as down in the dumps, I think, as perhaps it maybe once was.
And you think of just how people consume media these days. You can listen to a Diddy song in your headphones on the subway on the way to work, and nobody knows what you're listening to. It's your business whether or not you want to still consume the content that he produces. Do have more updates coming in. The Assistant U.S. Attorney Comey continuing to say, I'm aware of cases. This is as far as whether Sean Combs, what bail, if bail should be set, because he's been found guilty on 2 counts related to the Mann Act, transportation to engage in prostitution. She says, I'm aware of cases involving minors, but we intend to raise relevant conduct at sentencing, the drugs and violence. The judge says, I like the letters from each side. When? A few hours. So we're expecting to hear something related to bail, moving and at least at some point today, potentially. The judge then says, I think that makes sense. Mr. Combs does not want to go back to the MDC, and Mr. Combs is shaking his head. So 1 p.m. letters, and we'll convene in the afternoon. I'll let the parties know when. Mark Agnifilo says he would be a fool, which he is not, to violate any condition. So the judge says for now, they are adjourned. So there you go, adjourned until 1 o'clock in the afternoon, when I believe the prosecution and defense will be making some sort of argument about what happens now to Sean Diddy Combs ahead of any potential sentence related to the 2 charges that he was found guilty of, transportation to engage in prostitution. Have a poll, a big poll result, more than 24,000 of you voting on this. Predictions on the verdict. At the time, we had guilty on some counts at 48%. So you were correct. Guilty on all counts, 36%. Not guilty at 14%. William, I'm going to bring you back in because I asked Candace just what this defense team did well for Sean Diddy Combs, though he is still convicted on 2 pretty serious charges and could end up going to federal prison. But when you look at this defense team, this all-star cast, what did they do that's just a little bit different than the typical defense attorney that someone might get if they don't have the money that Sean Diddy Combs has?
Well, first of all, what you just said is probably the most important part of it here. I mean, they had next to limitless resources, which unfortunately is not true for the overwhelming majority of people who are charged either federally or on a state level. And so, Sean Combs is in a position to be able to afford not only top-notch attorneys, but everything that comes along with it. Top-notch investigators, people who are willing to pour through and able to pour through hours and hours and hours of videos, to go through thousands upon thousands of text messages. The system doesn't allow for that in most circumstances. So Combs is very lucky and blessed to be able to afford that type of attorney with the resources that go with it. As far as the lawyers themselves go, look, they did a fantastic job here. One of the things that they did during a closing argument was they humanized Sean Combs as much as they could. They did everything they could to take the sting out of that 2016 video that we've all seen 1,000 times now. They were successful in doing that. And in their cross-examination of the government's witnesses, they were able to sort of put on a shadow case. They called no witnesses, but instead they used the government's own witnesses against the government. And that's the key to cross-examination, is when you have these witnesses who are testifying against your client, if you're able to spin it in such a way that they become your witnesses or testify favorably for your client, that's exactly what you want them to do, and that's what they did here. They certainly did that with Cassie Ventura. They did it with Jane. They did it with Mia, and those were obviously the three most important witnesses that the government had, and yet they were able to turn that testimony around and use it to their own advantage. It was brilliant.
Programming update for today, as we are following this coverage live of the verdicts related to Sean Diddy Combs. We'll run through the verdicts once again for you here in just a moment, just in case you're just joining us, trying to figure out what's going on. I can tell you that count one, racketeering conspiracy, that was not guilty. Sex trafficking of Cassie Ventura, not guilty. Sex trafficking of the victim, pseudonym Jane, not guilty, but guilty counts on both related to guilty verdicts on both counts related to transportation to engage in prostitution. And we are breaking down exactly what this means. Court right now has been adjourned until this afternoon as the prosecution and defense are trying to figure out what is going to happen to Sean Combs ahead of any possible sentence that he could face. He's been staying at the Metro Detention Center since his arrest in September of last year. The defense is arguing $1 million bond, let Sean Combs go home, but then the prosecution saying, hey, he was still convicted. He needs to stay in custody ahead of whatever possible sentence, which there could be a sentence that puts Sean Combs in federal prison. So that part of the story is not done just yet, but we're expecting to learn a little more about what could happen ahead of sentencing this afternoon. Another update just coming in here after the judge left the courtroom. From the gallery, there was a loud clapping and cheering as Sean Combs is led back into the holding cell. Candace, I think of yesterday when the partial verdict came back. We put up that sketch, and it was for the first time, at least that I saw in a sketch, that Sean Combs looked concerned. To think of less than 24 hours later, it is this situation that he's in. I keep asking for your reaction because it's just incredible to think when you look back on this case that was a strong one, that many people believed, a strong one by the prosecution. One question I have is why not call more witnesses? He's facing all these civil lawsuits for people saying that he did a lot of the things that Cassie Ventura and Jane accused him of. Why were there not more victims, that could have potentially bolstered the prosecution's case more?
Well, listen, we are going to find more about Gina. I think that is one of the instances where people have a lot of questions. She, for people who know her story, she had a lot to say. We didn't hear from her. We didn't hear from Christina Quorum. We didn't hear from security guards, as I've talked about. He's got a lot of civil lawsuits where some of this information might come out and play out. Why not do it? Just did not work strategically. Why didn't we hear from more prostitutes? I think that fact is that we know that when it comes to the Mann Act, that was the low-hanging fruit and that was proven. But when we look at other witnesses, we have to go on a case-by-case basis. What were their stories? What were the options in terms of, if I'm a prosecuting attorney, do I need to take a chance and have them on that stand? Or have I made my points? And I think that each side did their due diligence to bring the witnesses before the jury, make their case. As the defense did, they said, hey, I'm going to punch holes in these particular witnesses that you're bringing prosecution. And apparently it worked. But I think that one thing that people have to remember is this. When it comes to him getting out, this is a man that was convicted. This is a man that when he came to New York, as William said, he's someone who brought drugs and was set up for a freak off and was going to continue in that same vein. If I were the defense, though, I would say, but that was also a man who was addicted to drugs. This is someone now who is not addicted to drugs. He is also someone now who knows that his fate is a lot more important than he would have ever thought of. And I would make that argument on that side. But I think I'm for the prosecution to say, why would he go anywhere? He's convicted on 2 counts. This is not something that leads to, yes, let's let him walk out today, a free man. I don't think that that would make sense. Terrible precedent.
Another programming update for those of you joining us here on the Law and Crime YouTube stream. Jesse Weber, who has been one of the leading voices in analyzing this case, going back to when Sean Combs was indicted, as all of you know here on Law and Crime. He's going to come on the stream, take over for me at 11:30 this morning Eastern time. So if you have post-verdict questions, be sure to drop them in the chat. We'll get those for Jesse as well as Elizabeth. Very excited to hear just her thoughts, what it was like to be in the courtroom as that verdict was read. And then if there is any sort of news conference, if the attorneys come out, both prosecution and defense, we will bring you those news conferences live. Also, Dan Abrams is going to be joining us at 10:50 to talk a little bit more about this verdict and his reaction, having covered so many high-profile cases throughout his career. William, I have a question coming in here. This is from IA. It's a question. Candace, I'll ask you this question as well. William, I'll start with you. Does this mean that the prosecution didn't pick its witnesses well? It seems they didn't take testimonies and sentenced him based on receipts for prostitution, no?
So, again, whenever there's a verdict, regardless of what the verdict is, hindsight's always 20/20. So we can easily sit here and pick apart what the prosecution did. We can sit here and pick apart what the defense team did. But as Candace said earlier, they both did an outstanding job. Whether or not they should have called other witnesses, some of these other women who are suing Diddy, the fact of the matter is this, is that every one of those witnesses who the prosecution could have called because there were lawsuits going on, the defense team is going to say, this is yet another person who's suing Combs. This is yet another person who has a financial motive here, because that's where those witnesses would come from. So I think it's easy to sit here and say, yes, they should have called these other witnesses. But again, all those witnesses probably have their own baggage that came along with it. The key, though, is quorum. I am surprised that we didn't hear from KK. Again, we don't know what her situation was in terms of immunity. I don't know if it would have tipped the scales, but if there was one witness who, as I sit here, obviously not being part of the trial, that I probably would have wanted to hear from, it was her. I think she could have helped the government, again, if she was willing to testify on their behalf.
And you're taking a live look outside the courthouse in Lower Manhattan. You can just see the crowd of people who have gathered in the wake of these verdicts that have come down in the trial of Sean Diddy Combs. A live shot there of the front door. His defense wants him to go home today. $1 million bond. We'll see if the judge, what he has to say about that. The prosecution has asked that Sean Combs continue to be held ahead of any sort of sentencing. We don't know when a sentencing date would be, but there's going to be conversation about what happens to Sean Combs after this verdict in the afternoon. Court's been adjourned until 1 o'clock. We're waiting to get our Elizabeth Milner. She's just getting set up right now. So if you do have questions for Elizabeth about what just went down in the courtroom, put those in the chat and we'll ask those questions to her live on the air. Candace, not to simplify what happened, but as we try to analyze all the testimony over 7 weeks and whether this witness was strong or that witness was strong, in cases like this, what does it just come down to? How often does it just come down to these were 12 people that just saw it this way, and if it was 12 other people, they could have seen it another way?
I think that is the most concise, specific, right answer. You don't know these 12 people and how they believed and felt about each of these particular witnesses and crimes. If we go back to the first witness, which was Daniel Phillip, a prostitute, and then
We are looking outside at the courthouse for Diddy. Drop it down in the chat. What do you guys think sentencing will look like? Do you guys think Diddy will receive bail? He is proposing $1 million bail. Okay, what say the sippers on the Diddy verdict that has came down this morning? Acquitted on 3 charges of the most serious ones and convicted of the lesser of the 2 of transpo of a hoe. Okay, transpo of a hoe. Diddy got transpo of a hoe, convicted twice on those 2 charges. Let's listen in.
Hey there, everybody, I'm Jesse Weber, and welcome to our continued coverage of the Sean Combs criminal case. What a day. The verdict is in. Sean Combs has been acquitted of all charges except 2, transportation to engage in prostitution, the Mann Act violations. This is a massive, massive win for Sean Combs. There's no other way to say it. When he was facing racketeering conspiracy and up to life in prison, and now, oh, by the way, sex trafficking, a minimum of 15 years in prison, acquitted of those charges, both with respect to Cassie Ventura Fine and Jane, and now has been convicted of transportation to engage in prostitution. Yes, they are federal crimes. Yes, the prosecution may be even advocating for 20 years in prison. Each one has a maximum of 10 years in prison. They want it to run one after the other. That could be highly unlikely. There is no, our understanding, mandatory minimum for transportation to engage in prostitution. In other words, he is looking at a totally different reality than he was at the beginning of the day. And now we are trying to understand what happens next. There is a consideration today about whether he will be released. Will he be released pending sentencing, which might happen about 70 or 90 days from now? And that will come out today. We're going to get a little bit of logistics about what's happening. And we're also going to try to figure out what the possible sentence could mean and what this verdict means. You have to imagine this is a loss for the prosecution. This is a loss for the Southern District of New York, who compiled a case about him. The accusation was operating a criminal enterprise for years. The jury did not believe it. We have a statement right now that came in from the United States Attorney for the Southern District of New York, Jay Clayton, and Special Agent in charge of the New York Field Office of Homeland Security Investigations, Ricky J. Patel, on the verdict. This just came in, quote, "Sex crimes deeply scar victims, and the disturbing reality is that sex crimes are all too present in many aspects of our society. Victims endure gut-wrenching physical and mental abuse, leading to lasting trauma. New Yorkers and all Americans want this scourge stopped and perpetrators brought to justice. Prosecuting sex crimes requires brave victims to come forward and tell their harrowing stories. We and our law enforcement partners recognize the hardships victims endure and have prioritized a victim-centered approach to investigating and prosecuting these cases. Today, we recognize the important work of the SDNY's Civil Rights Unit, as well as the tireless efforts of the women and men at HSI who are devoted to combating human trafficking. We thank the special agents from the U.S. Attorney's Office of the Southern District of New York, Digital Forensic Unit, and the Complex Analytics and Social Media Enhancement Team at the New York, New Jersey High-Intensity Drug Trafficking Area. We would also like to thank our partners at the NYPD for their assistance in this matter and for sharing our victim-centered approach to combating sex crimes. Nothing necessarily on point about the verdict per se. Interesting. Let me bring in, by the way, so we're going to take your questions as they come in. We're going to try to do extended coverage as we figure out what the rest of the day will look like in terms of when sentencing might be scheduled, in terms of whether or not Sean Combs will be released today. Will we see him? That's a question. In court for all of the action for this trial, and SiriusXM host Mina Sawat-Lone. It's great to have you both here. Elizabeth, I'll start with you. Your reaction to this verdict, and number 2, what can we expect for the rest of the day? And you know what? Let me add a number 3 in there. What was it like inside that courtroom when the verdict came down?
Well, a lot of people were at the edge of their seats when that verdict was about to be read out loud. I was very anxious,
I don't know
even
if we're
sitting
having
in
an
my
audio
seat in the
issue, if we can hear Elizabeth, but I can't hear her on my end. There we go. Now we got Elizabeth. Hey, Elizabeth, you're back with us.
Oh,
Okay. I was like, is my mic on? My mic is on, I promise. So I will say this, Jesse, that there was a lot of anticipation while that verdict was about to be read out loud. I think a lot of us who are on the press side of the courtroom were at the edge of our seats waiting to see the jury's reaction whenever they came into the courtroom, but also what their verdicts would be rendered. And obviously we know that to be that he was only found guilty on count 3 and 5, that being transportation to engage in prostitution in relation to Cassie, in relation to Jane, but not guilty on count 1 RICO conspiracy, and not guilty on count 2 and 4, that being sex trafficking, Cassie and Jane. So I think from the family's perspective, from the defense's perspective, and even some people inside that courtroom, I think they were pretty pleased by the outcome of the jury's decision. I did note that there was an audible applause. A lot of people were kind of either doing prayer hands up to the sky, that type of thing. And that was coming from the family's kind of point of view. And it seemed like they were pretty pleased. And I don't know if you heard, Jesse, when I was talking with Chris earlier, he being Sean Combs, turned around in his defense chair and told his family that he's coming home. So it seems like from his perspective that maybe his defense attorneys told him it's a possibility the judge may let you go today. I didn't think that was at all a possibility, given that he has been found guilty on 2 of the charges. But it seems like from the defense's perspective, they were so pleased with the verdict. Obviously, they would have loved for an acquittal on all counts, but in terms of the guilty counts that were rendered, I think that they were just pretty happy. And according to Mark Agnifilo, now Sean Combs has his life back. In terms of just other people who were inside that courtroom, it seems like, again, people not even just from the Combs family, but other people on the public side were applauding the defense team after the verdict was rendered. There were a lot of hugs inside that courtroom. It was either the family, it was the defense attorneys. I saw, even when the verdict was read out loud, Tenny Garagos and Sean Combs really having kind of a tight squeeze on their hands. There was tears flowing from Brian Steele, from Tenny Garagos, from Ana Maria Esteval, from Mark Agnifilo. And so it seems like the defense and they did a good job. They didn't put up any witnesses, but they did an excellent job with the cross-examinations, and they were pretty pleased given the jury's decision.
We're getting a lot of questions in about this, Elizabeth. Before we get to them, just real quick, what can we expect for the rest of the day? I understand we might have a development at 1 p.m., or at least we believe those are when papers are going to be submitted in terms of bail, right? In terms of whether or not Sean Combs can be released today. Which, by the way, we are in a very different scenario. When he applied for bail during the course of this trial, during the course of this criminal case, the sex trafficking and the racketeering allegations were hanging over him. So when you talked about, was he a danger to the community? What was he charged with? The seriousness of the offenses, likelihood of fleeing, those considerations were coupled with the charges that he was facing. He no longer faces those charges. These transportation charges, sure, they're federal crimes, but he is in a much better position to argue for release today than he has ever been. What do we expect the schedule is going to be for the rest of the day?
Well, I knew I missed one of your questions, Jesse. So sorry about that.
No
but yeah,
worries.
It seems like so it seems like both parties are working right now to kind of draft up an email or a letter to the judge as far as their arguments as to why Sean Combs should or should not be released on some type of bail condition pending his sentencing. Now, Mark Agnifilo, he stood up and he says that Sean Combs should be released. He should be able to walk out of that courthouse today. Now, right now, he's not at MDC Brooklyn. From my understanding, he's still being held at kind of a holding cell up inside the courthouse. But Mark Agnifilo was pretty adamant. He wants his client to be released on some type of bail condition. He should be able to return to Two-Star Island over in Florida. He should have travel limits only to Florida, Los Angeles, where he has another home, and to New York City. If there was any type of questions in regards to him being a very wealthy person and him having access to a private plane, according to Mark Agnifilo, his plane is currently over in Maui. He doesn't even have access to his plane. In terms of just even Sean Combs' passport, Mark Agnifilo said both he and Tenny Garagos have possession of his passport and that they would return it to pretrial services, even proposing that he be released on a $1 million bail, given that he was acquitted on RICO conspiracy and given that he was also acquitted on 2 counts of sex trafficking. And so they said that even the family who was inside that courtroom for the verdict, that they would be able to kind of sign some type of condition to help him be allowed to leave on bail conditions if the judge goes for it. Now, obviously, from the government side, they were saying that the defense is being a little too lenient, given that Sean Combs was still found guilty on 2 charges. But we'll see what those arguments look like when they return later this afternoon.
We're also talking about the reaction to this verdict. I mentioned the statement from the government. Per CNN, Cassie Ventura's lawyer, Douglas Wigdor, told CNN following, again, the Sean Combs being acquitted of sex trafficking and racketeering, found guilty of the Mann Act, transportation to engage in prostitution charges. There was a lot of mixed emotions in that courtroom. Obviously, we would have liked to have seen convictions on the RICO charges and the sex trafficking charges, but Cassie prompted this investigation by the Southern District, and now Sean Combs stands before this court as a convicted felon of 2 crimes. To be very clear, he was acquitted with respect to the sex trafficking of Cassie Ventura. He was found guilty of transportation to engage in prostitution with respect to Cassie. So Cassie and her testimony did support one of the convictions in this case. Let me bring in Mina Sewat-Lona. Mina, so good to see you. Thanks so much for joining us. We have a number of Super Chat questions that are coming in. For example, we have a Super Chat question from JB Dub. Thank you so much. Jesse, man, just want to say thank you for everything, man. Great job covering this. That's so kind. Thank you so much. This is an interesting one we had here from Super Chat. This is from JAM. Thank you so much. How does this verdict impact the civil sexual assault lawsuits that he faces? Mina, you and I both know different standard of law, right? Different burden of proof. But I do wonder if we see some sort of movement or action as a result of this verdict.
I mean, there's no way to foresee that, but I would say I don't think it's going to change. I think that he's going to still have to fight those allegations. And they're like,
thanks for watching. Remember to show your support by liking, subscribing, and sharing. It's a blessing. Keep your teacups filled and ready for my next upload. Until then, stay inspired and remember, always stay sifted.